Hello everyone, welcome to this week's writing Q&A video. I'm Cam Weiland and I run the writing website Helping Writers Become Authors. And this week's question is from Claire Von Pipe, who asks, how many characters are too many? I am writing the first book in a sci-fi series where minor characters become major characters in later books. Book 1, Chapter 1 introduces predominantly the two main characters, hero and heroine, as leaders of a mixed gender team of 10, and 3 minor characters get a brief mention. Chapter 2 brings in 3 more characters, and slowly throughout the book, more characters become known. I've been told that this is far too many characters in the first 3 chapters, which would confuse readers. I would appreciate hearing your opinion on this issue. So, first of all, as with so many things in writing, the answer is subjective. It totally depends on your book, on the needs of the plot, the genre to some extent, and also how well these characters are being introduced in the beginning of the story. There is no hard and fast rule of how many characters you can have. You can have tons, a huge cast, or you could have a cast of 1. But I think when you're deciding, one of the most valuable things is to have kind of a system to understand the underlying theory and how characters are playing out within the story, what they're bringing to the plot and to the thematic argument, how they're impacting your protagonist and their arc. So there's several different models that you can use for this. One I like, which I think originated with Michael Hauge in his book, Writing Screenplays That Sell, I think, is just simply 3 characters. It's the protagonist, who obviously is the main actor in the story, the antagonist, who is the main opposition, and a reflection or relationship character. You can also kind of divide that into 2 separate characters sometimes, where you have a character who's properly a reflection character in that they're reflecting the protagonist back to themselves kind of, and also a love interest character. Or you could just combine the 2, and that often works really well as well. And there's other systems you can use. Matt Bird, in his book, The Secrets of Story, he talks about using kind of a triangle model of mind, body, and heart, and having characters who represent those, and being able to kind of identify where you're doubling up and where you maybe don't need as many characters representing heart and you don't need as many characters representing mind. I've also used the alignment model from Dungeons and Dragons, in which you have good, evil, and neutral, and then each of those can be paired with lawful, chaotic, and neutral. I'm not sure about that. You have to look it up. Anyway, that's kind of useful as well, just for seeing where characters are coming from. You know, if you've got, too many evil characters or too many good characters, or if you're just getting enough nuance within the moral complexity of the story. You can also use systems like the Enneagram, things like that, just to help you see if you're kind of filling in all the possible blanks within your story, but also where you're doubling up and where maybe you've got characters who are playing the same role and you could easily combine them into one character. The other thing, of course, is to look at how these characters are functioning in the plot. If you have, one character who could execute many different actions for catalyzing the plot, then you probably are better off stripping that down to that one character rather than bringing in a lot of different people to do what is essentially the same job. Now, in regards to Claire's question, which was specifically about characters in a series, obviously if you're, trying to build a series in which you have different books featuring different characters as you go, that's kind of a different question in a way. A lot of series do this, where they will start with the story that's particularly about 1 or 2 characters and then introduce the minor characters as they go, and those minor characters will feature as the protagonists in a later book. You have to be careful with this because you want to maintain the integrity of the story you're actually writing and the characters that's about. So, apart from plot considerations in which it's necessary for this person to be on stage to do something, one of the minor characters, it's generally better to just focus on the characters who are important in this story and kind of just sow hints of the other characters as you go. For example, a lot of series will focus on the main 2 characters in a particular book, and then by the end, they will kind of introduce whoever is going to be the protagonists in the next book, but not necessarily all of the characters in the entire series. And that does depend on, how your story world is set up. But I definitely wouldn't compromise book one or any individual book within the series in order to introduce characters who aren't important and tell later books. And the final point here is definitely, how do you introduce the characters if you do need to introduce a very large cast in one book. And a lot of this comes down to timing. If you can avoid introducing 10 characters all in the first chapter or all in a shorter period of time, that's usually going to be best, because it's very easy for readers to get overwhelmed, to forget names, and frankly not to care. Because ultimately how we get them to remember and invest in characters is by giving those characters some kind of a emotional significance. By creating mini characteristic moments really for every minor character who features in the story. And that takes time. That takes the dramatization and the ability to kind of build little scenes or mini scenes around them so that they're memorable, they're interesting, and we don't forget about them when we come into them later in the story, but also that we're happy about it. We're excited. Oh yeah, I like that person. I want to see them again. And particularly when you're trying to introduce characters for later books, you're basically using them as hooks to pull readers into those later books. So you want them to be memorable. Because if it's a lackluster introduction, they're not going to care. They're not going to be pulled into that next book necessarily. So bottom line here is, understand the role that each character is playing in the story. Focus on the characters who are important in any individual book. Introduce them. And try to disperse other introductions throughout the story to the best of whatever the plot's requiring. And focus on introducing the characters with characteristic moments that are interesting and memorable and that readers will be excited about, so that they will be interested in re-encountering those characters later on. So I hope that's helpful. And I know that was a lot of information, so I will be linking a couple posts that I have about this down below in the description. And if you'd like me to answer a question in a future video, just leave it in the comments as well. And be sure to stop by my website, helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. I post lengthy articles about this kind of thing, as well as a podcast every Monday. I'll see you next week.